this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. I've often thought about this because I see such a broad swath of true crime coverage and information about a variety of different deaths. You know, the country might be focused on, say, for instance, one thing that's going on. Like right now at the time of this taping, we've got like the Karen Reed trial going on. We've got a variety of other things involving Kohberger and Huerman and all these things that are waiting in the wings. There's a lot of ink being slung about. And I've often thought over the years, do we develop patterns as a consumer public as it applies to true crime? And the reason I ask that to myself is that do we get so caught up in cases where, because they're in the public eye, that maybe other things will be forgotten? I'll give you a great example, and I've talked about this case extensively and been on various television shows and stuff, and that's the Piketon Massacre. Back from 16 up in southern Ohio, you had 8 family members killed in that case, and hardly an ounce of ink was spilt over it. But yet you had other things that were singular deaths where the coverage was just intense. You know, things like, I don't know, the Jodi Arias case going back to 2013. It all depends on what hits, if you know what I mean. Well, right now, we're in the middle of the Huerman case, which is N.E.S.K in Gilgo Beach. And it's all the rage. Everybody wants to talk about it. As well they should. But you know, there's another group of deaths that have made their way into the news cycle. And some people are hinting that there might be a serial killer on the loose in a specific region of our country. Now, are these deaths related? I don't know. Is it a consequence of maybe all of the news about Huerman? I don't know. Or is there validity to this? Are people putting 2 and 2 together? Let's chat about it. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. I think that as humans, Dave, our lives are all about patterns. You know, there's certain ways that we go about things. There's certain things that we view. There's certain things that we consume and read and all of those. And, you know, I think about things that, you know, for instance, that I watch on YouTube. I watch generally nothing political. I watch nothing about true crime unless it's something that I'm studying. Most of the time, the stuff that I direct myself toward is history. You know, I love to study history and the classics. And that's a pattern I've developed over the years. You've been in media for a long time, and you've been, I don't know, I love this old term. I would classify you as a newsman. You were a news reader for many years and have covered news all over the country. And I'm curious. Do you think the media develops patterns like this?
Yes, I am more of a commentator than a news reader. And the reason is real basic. I've had to explain this to my family recently. And that is, as far as reading goes, I'm a voracious reader. I read a lot, but I don't read word for word. I paraphrase as I read. And you can't do that when you're a news anchorman. I'm not a news anchorman. I am actually a reporter, journalist, and commentator. So I ended up on Nancy's show to start with. You know, you have an expertise that very few people possess. And because it comes from an education in the classroom, and it comes in from work in the field. And by the way, being successful at both, at the academics and in the field. And you're able to bring that together. And then you have that next level talent of being able to make people like me understand what it is you're talking about. And I don't even think you realize how good you are at what you do. And I'm coming from broadcasting end of it. Joe, you're able to take, like, I'm excited about doing this particular show because it has the broadcasting end of it, the angle. We've named it already, N.E.S.K. You mentioned Long Island serial killer Rex Heuermann calling it L.I.S.K. This one has already been named N.E.S.K, the New England serial killer. Is there one? And this story has gotten legs because of social media. There are Facebook pages devoted to it, and Twitter accounts and X accounts and TikToks are being devoted. And we're talking thousands of people by the day asking questions about this story. We have right now six female bodies recovered between March 6th and April 10th in one area of the Northeast. So
that's a very tight window from a time sequencing as far as the discovery.
And it's recent. It's right now. I mean, it's right. We're talking 2 weeks ago, Joe, when you and I were up in East Hampton, right?
Yeah.
What was the name? What the place that we landed in? Islip, right?
Yeah,
Islip, Long Island.
Yeah.
One of our victims actually is from there. And we were just there a couple of weeks ago as a couple of these bodies were being recovered on April 9th and April 10th. So this is a somewhat media-generated event, but it's coming from the groundswell of true crime people, armchair detectives, if you will, something you and I talked about at a conference, how not important, but how impactful it is that some stories get attention while others don't. And now, you mentioned Piketon. Until you and I talked about it, I didn't know nothing about it. I knew nothing about that story. And then when I got into it, I'm like, how do we not know about this? Yeah. But Joe, there are stories that you and I have covered and spent many hours on that other people are going, when did that happen? Was that, and you're going, it happened 3 weeks ago, that kind of thing. So it's hit and miss with a lot of it.
You have to run to keep up many times.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know if you concur with this, but it's almost like there are rarely cases where a gigantic gate comes down and you have to stop what you're doing and you focus everything on those cases. You look at L.I.S.K with Long Island serial killer, so-called. You think about that, and you might, if you look at it chronologically, from the first body that was found until the very last, I don't know that there was like some huge gate that descended and everybody stopped and looked. It took a long time and a lot of people grinding over this thing, and not just the law enforcement people, but people in the media that knew that something was up and they tried to keep the story alive. And I think I'm just curious if this is fertile ground for a cautionary tale, because I'm worried. I'm worried about this based upon somebody that has assessed serial homicides over the course of my career. And I'm trying to understand because there's just certain things that we look for. And I just want to know if those elements are there.
And that's why I'm so thankful that you have the time to do this, because I'm watching members of the media and they are salivating over N.E.S.K, the New England serial killer. And my first question, Joe, is this something that you're familiar with? Not the way it's being covered, but are you familiar with serial killers and figuring out what happened? Is this something you've worked before? Is it something you can teach? What are we actually doing when it comes to this? Because we've got armchair detectives with no education and no background that are making accusations and casting aspersions and creating a media serial killer. Yet we've got 3 females identified. Yeah. Their remains identified. We're talking about somebody's mother, somebody's daughter, somebody's sister. That we didn't find a body. We found remains. Yeah. And I think there's a bit of a difference there. I need you to help me I need you to explain to me what a serial killer is. How do you identify that? And does this fit?
Yeah. Well, let's just say if all of these cases are related, it meets the classic definition, 3 or more. And that number has varied for years. I think at one point in time, the number was higher, and then they reduced it. And I think it was reduced by the people at the Behavioral Sciences Unit in Quantico with FBI. They pulled it back down to 3. I might be wrong about that, but I think initially the number was higher. So yeah, from that basic precept, this would qualify as a series of serialized homicides. But we're just this case. We don't even know that these are homicides at this point in time. We don't, because I got to be honest with you. I don't know about you. Everything I've read, I haven't seen a cause of death yet.
No, I haven't either, Joe.
And I just, what I know is that there's a big similarity here because, well, let's just look at it geographically. It's the Northeast. And you can, I don't know, I guess you could say that you could throw a proverbial hat over the areas. I think that most of the areas where these women's bodies have been found are like in a 100-mile radius or maybe a little bit more.
Yeah. Like that, yeah.
So yeah, geographically it could fit, but we're missing huge pieces here. Every serialized homicide I've ever worked, and I'm thinking back right now, over the course of my career in New Orleans, I think I worked 3 sets of serial killings down there. Some were one case in particular, I just knew that there were probably hundreds of bodies up and down I-10. And the guy had been called the I-10 killer, a variety of names. And I had another set that guy killed 6 women, and he was caught actually dumping the body in the same location where he dumped all the other ones. The sheriff's office finally set up a hide and was watching, literally caught him pulling a body out of the trunk of a car.
That's kind of like Wayne Williams in Atlanta.
Yeah, with the splash in the water.
Yeah.
And then there was another set, and my memory fails me on that one. But when I got to Atlanta, we had several. Memorial Drive killer was killing prostitutes. We had the Vine City killer. There were like 2 or 3 other ones too that we thought were serial related. And the thing about it is that you have to establish a pattern. And I think one of the big missing pieces here is that if we don't have a causal statement relative to what brought about these deaths, that's a big piece. Okay, because most serial killers, they have a preference for how they take people's lives. I'll give you an example. The guy I was telling you about was pulling the bodies out of the trunk of the car. He loved to use wire to use as a garrote around the necks of these prostitutes. And he would drug them beforehand, and then the garrote is essentially got a one little handle, and you can tighten it down, loosen it. And he would loosen it multiple times. He was deriving pleasure from this. The guy was a sadist and filled with a lot of anger. He'd kill women every time he got into a fight with his fiancée. He wouldn't attack her. He'd go out and find a prostitute and kill her.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, no.
Now, and using the garrote like that.
Yeah.
The guy, the clown in Chicago that buried the boy. Gacy, that's what he used. He would play all kinds of little tricks and things to get the
handcuff trick and all of that. Yeah. And he was another guy that hadn't come to terms with his own homosexuality. He was very angry, and he would use ligatures, which a garrote is a form of a ligature, or bare hands. But you're thinking about suffocation or strangulation. And it's interesting, Dave, that the lion's share of the cases that I worked involved asphyxia. I never had like I don't know, what's the guy's name up in New York, Son of Sam. I never had, they called him the 44 caliber killer. I never worked serial killings that involved handguns or rifles even, it's just firearms. I don't think I ever worked a case involving serial killing with an edged weapon. Now I've had multiple people killed by one person wielding an edged weapon, but not like a series of going out and stabbing somebody or cutting their throats and that sort of thing.
I didn't realize you'd worked so many. I didn't think there were that many serial killings. Like when you started naming them off,
Yeah,
I didn't realize there were that many. And I certainly didn't know that you had this was part and parcel of your.
And the thing about it with serial killings, dependent upon their geographic positioning, I think that it's more the exception, and somebody's going to gig me on this, I know. It seems to me that it's more the exception than the norm, to have somebody that's like a BTK that's settled in a community, has been there for years and years, and is not moving about to hunt prey. They're hunting in their one little area. And I know people say that they hunt with areas they're familiar with, but if you look at long haul truckers, what are they familiar with? Well, they're familiar with their truck. That's their moving house. And they're familiar with truck stops. And so you get that, quite a bit. So there's kind of a mishmash out there, just like over the years, there's been a mishmash, or not a mishmash, but kind of a confusion about the number of kills that it takes to be classified as a serial killer. This area that we're talking about in the Northeast, Dave, my gosh, there are interstates running everywhere. And so, I was talking about, kind of throwing the proverbial hat on this. If you're thinking about, an area that's kind of circling a particular location, how can they get in? How can they get out? What's the geography like? Where are they found relative to roadways? What's the terrain like where they're recovered? Are they just being dumped out on the side of the road? Are they being placed in water? Which one of these cases I know was found in a river. So there's a lot to consider here, but this is what I do know at this point in time. I do know that I don't have a cause of death on these victims. And I also know that to that end, I don't know if there is a connectivity between the types of deaths, the instrumentality that may or may not have been used, and also, is there a common denominator relative to the perpetrator? What's this thing being called again, Dave? What is the media called it again? N.E.S.K?
It's being called N.E.S.K. Stands for New England Serial Killer. One thing I did want to pop in here with, Joe, because I looked it up. You and I were talking about I-20. And you were right. It ends in Texas at the intersection of I-10. And I thought it was in West Texas. So there you go. But yeah, you got the Long Island serial killer, which has been in the news now, to be honest with you, for a long time. It's been called different things too. And I still think there could be another person involved. The other question, do you really think Huerman stopped? But that's another day. Now, we've got this New England serial killer story. And the reason is we have 6 women who have been found. Now, I want to be really clear in how I asked this, Joe. When I asked you about serial killers and how many serial killer cases you've worked. And is there a commonality among the victims as well as the perpetrator that you can create or find?
Yeah, I can. And I'm only talking about my little slice of the pie. All right. I don't have the 40,000 foot view that the FBI has. I'm just talking about my little slice of pie, the areas I worked in. Okay. My commonality, perpetrator, to the best of my knowledge, at least, I never had a female perpetrator. They were all males. And with the exception of the Vine City killings in Atlanta, who were all elderly ladies, which is disgusting on another level entirely. They were prostitutes almost to a person. I didn't have this kind of like you have with BTK where he's randomly targeting. I mean, literally, the first victims that he claimed were literally a nuclear family.
I was going to say it was a family in their basement.
Yeah, Otero.
Oh.
And he went in and wiped out the lot. And so, it's always been, in my case at least, it's always been female prostitutes. I have not, though I have had friends that have worked, or colleagues that have worked cases involving male prostitutes over the years. Myself, it's always been female prostitutes. The lion's share of them have been, living on the streets, and this is kind of a classic profile, had very little contact with their biological family. Matter of fact, many times families wouldn't even know what had happened to them. That's what makes them such easy prey. But I don't, as of right now, if they're building out a profile, and I would assume that some of the authorities have reached out, and I've got a big clue to that, and I'm going to reveal it to you, about trying to build out a profile if they're believing that these are a serialized event. You're going to want to know what these individuals' backgrounds are, and if there's some kind of commonality. Now, the reason that I think that a profile could be built out, and again, we don't know everything the police know at this time, and we should not know everything that the police know. These are outside sources that are putting together these things. Okay, so the police, this is the way it generally works. If you have a serialized event and it's multi-jurisdictional, first thing you're going to do is that there will generally be a task force formed in a single jurisdiction. So let's say you've got multiple bodies that are found in the state of Connecticut. Okay, well, under the auspices of the state, they can get together and they will form a task force within that state. All right. Now, if you've got one case, which there is one case in this group that they've identified as N.E.S.K, that originates out of Rhode Island, Dave, that person will not necessarily be on the task force. And then there's another case. There's cases out of Massachusetts and I think New Hampshire as well. So it's multi-jurisdictional. So how do you unite all of these people? Well, first off, you have to be able to prove that there's connectivity with physical evidence, cause of death, typology of the way they were found, what was perpetrated against them. And that includes things like any kind of instruments that were used. Was there any kind of posing that was done with the bodies? Were they missing clothes? Were they all clothed? Was their clothing manipulated? Were there any kind of postmortem amputations, that people taking trophies, anything like that? And then what would happen is the next tier with this will be the feds. And it'll be like the FBI. They would form a federal task force. And the FBI would begin to work probably on a profile of not just the victims, but also the potential perpetrator here. So there's a lot of things that have to get into motion in order to get everybody going in the correct direction. One of the things I found out about being on a task force, and again, I'm just a coroner medical examiner kind of guy. I wasn't like going out and arresting people. I was examining remains. The one thing that I have found, though, and I was always fascinated by it, was with these task force, there is ego comes into it, big time, because everybody wants the claim to fame. If it turns out to be, let's just say, for instance, like with N.E.S.K, if you've got a multi-jurisdictional thing, everybody would like to say, well, we're the people that stopped N.E.S.K. Okay. Same thing would apply here. You have to have a leader of the group that's going to keep you focused on what the task is at hand. So if you've got this really divergent group of women, we're talking 6 here, 3 of which are still unidentified to this point, are you going to be able to jam down those egos and stay focused, like laser focused on what the task is. And that is ultimately getting this monster off the streets.
All right, now I've got a question for you, because we do have a lot of information, and I think I already told you this. We have 3 of the remains identified and 3 not identified. So let me start with the one woman, not the first one to go missing, because even though they were all found in the last month or so, in the last several weeks, it doesn't mean they were killed right away or that they died right away. We don't even know that they were killed. We just know we have remains. We don't know if they were murdered. We don't know. What we do know, like Paige Fannin, for example, Paige Fannin's body was found on March the 6th. Paige is from, this is the lady I was talking about from Islip, that you and I flew into. And she was reported missing in New York on March 4th of this year. Last seen on March 5th, and her body was found March 6th. This does not seem to fit into any of the other cases that we're talking about because of where her body was found and how quickly, she was found based on when she was last seen. And she was found in water after a very heavy rainfall. But hers was the first body found. The next was Denise Leary. Denise Leary was found on March 20th of 2025. Denise was reported missing, Joe, back last September. And that's where I look at that and go, okay, her condition, the remains of her is going to be a lot different than the remains of Paige Fannin. I mean,
yes,
you have Paige Fannin that was actually seen the day before her body was found, right?
Yeah.
And then we have one other woman who has been identified. Her name is Michelle Romano. Her body was found on March 26th. She went missing August of last year. That is a long time.
Yeah, it is. And of course, her body would be in more than an advanced state of decomposition. Let's go back to Paige Fannin real quick.
Right.
Now, we mentioned that she's from West Islip, New York, which is on Long Island, as you and I are now well aware of.
And by the way, until 2 weeks ago, I could not have told you where it was, just so you know.
It's.
I mean that in a positive way. I've always wanted to know that area, but I'm going to be honest with you, friends. If you're not from New York, if you're not from that area, it's kind of like I am from Southern California, and so I know what people think out there. It's just different than you can imagine. What a beautiful area, and the nicest people I've ever met, Joe.
Nice
nicest people I've ever met in my life.
They really were.
Unbelievable.
And I enjoyed going up there every year for the Hamptons who done it. With Paige Fannin, she was actually from West Islip, but she was found in a river in Connecticut. And so she was found as a result of them asking she was found with the assistance of a drone, actually. And so she was up there for a reason. Okay. And where she fell into, and I don't know that, just because you fall into a very fast moving river, which she was actually found in the Norwalk River. And it's like racing through there. And I don't know if you've ever been caught up in a current like that before in a river. I have almost drowned in a salmon fishing in a river up in Michigan one day. And, it just kind of pulled me down the river. And I'm a pretty stout guy, and I couldn't fight it. So if you're thinking about with her, what types of injuries did she display when they pulled her out of the water? And she's only been down for a couple of days. So it's not like she was left somewhere out in the woods where she's in a state of decay. So that's kind of an interesting person that they've put into this mix. I'd like to know, for my purposes as an investigator, Dave, and I'm in all honesty, I would go to the local authorities up there in Connecticut. I'd say, hey, let me ask you something. How many other people have you ever had drown in this river? are found dead in this river? Is this something that happens regularly, or is this so rare that you're sitting here scratching your head thinking, how'd you wind up in the river? Because this has never happened before. So I would have to kind of understand that and understand the dynamic around the river. How do you get to it? Can you fall off a bridge? Can you slip off of rocks? What's the story here? So,
so you're immediately thinking, if it's not an accident, somebody picked this and got discarded her body.
Yeah. And here's the thing about it. If you go down the road with serialized event, if the river is moving this fast, which that's the way they've portrayed this thing, Lord only knows, Dave, where she could have gone in. How long does the Norwalk River run? It's obviously not the Mississippi, but how far upstream could she have potentially gone in? Did she fall into the water where she was laying her head at night to go to sleep? Or was she so far away from her point of origin that you would think, wow, this is kind of impressive that her body traveled all of this distance. Where did she enter the river? Also, what types of injuries does she have to her body? I pulled a lot of bodies out of rivers, bodies of water, and it's amazing what happens to a body in water, particularly rapidly moving water, because bodies bounce off of everything. They get scratched by limbs that are hanging out, debris. They get caught up in debris. You'll see bodies that will actually have leaves and grass in their mouth and in their nose. They'll be covered in mud because they'll go into like a mud bank, then become dislodged. So it's a huge dynamic that you're having to deal with in a case like Paige Fannon's, of course.
Okay, so she's the first body found. And, by the way, she was found 2 days after she was reported missing. So let's move to Denise Leary. Denise Leary, Joe, was reported missing, or was last seen, September 29th of last year. And I don't know if you do this. I know I do. I think of where was I on September 29th of 2024? Where was I and what was I doing?
I do it too. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
This makes it relatable for me and for family when I try to figure out what happened and try to explain it. What happened with her that we know of?
Well, again, she's actually found not in water. She's actually found in the 100 block of a place called Rock Creek Road. They were clearing brush, out of a wooded area. And they made this discovery. Now, she's last seen in September, Dave, September 29th, found in March of this year, March 20th to be specific. Can I tell you this? She's in such an advanced state that the police to this day are still waiting from the medical examiner to find out what her cause of manner of death are. So that's how difficult this is. And here's one other thing about her that if you begin to kind of profile victims and try to understand, because you have to understand where they come from, what their background is, allegedly, Miss Leary had suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. Now, that doesn't mean on any level that people that are dealing with psychopathology can't be victims of serial killers, because there are a lot of people out on the streets that have terrible mental health issues, and they're as weak as lambs. You might be terrified of them when you're standing around them, but they really are. They don't have the ability necessarily to defend themselves, particularly a diminutive little woman like Miss Leary. So if she's out there, could she potentially be prey for a serial killer? Yeah, I suppose that she could be. How's she getting by if she's living on the streets? How's she getting by on the streets? Did she have family members she regularly checked in with? Was she eating regularly? Was she taking medication? Because if she's been diagnosed with paranoid schiz, you have to think that she's got a doctor or a therapist that's having to maintenance her. When's the last time they saw her? When's the last time she had her meds? So that's a big question here, but she's found in a brushy area and she's in an advanced state of decomposition. Was she drugged there to be hidden, from view? What was the status of her clothing? Because even if you've got a decomposing body, I think that people think that the clothing decomposes as well. I actually had a student say that to me at one point in time. Clothing is very resilient. So even as the body swells and then begins to contract back, the clothing is still going to be in place if they were closed to begin with. So that's something that you would certainly consider in this case.
I have a favorite aunt, Joe, that lived with mental illness, and she was one of my favorite people of all times. But there were times where it would be very difficult for my mother to deal with her, and that's why whenever people immediately jump to a conclusion because of mental health, it always bothers me, because you really have to know every person, whether they have mental health issues or not, is different. We're all unique specimens in a lot of ways. Michelle Romano, Joe. Michelle Romano went missing on August 18th of last year. Her remains were discovered on March 26th, and her remains were found, or the Rhode Island State Police reported this one. This goes back to, going to be honest with you, and I hope a lot of people caught you when you said this earlier about the different jurisdictions that are going to be dealing with all of these. As we collectively look at 6 women who have been found dead in this very small geographic area, I think each one of them is in a different law enforcement jurisdiction. And how will that play into solving this?
Right.
If they're tied together.
Yeah, if in fact they are tied together, you're going to have to find that one thread. If you imagine, and I'm kind of a simple guy, I love word pictures. If you literally imagine a thread being pulled by a gigantic needle, what is it that connects all of these cases together, that commonality, that kind of runs through them? And again, like in the case of Miss Romano, there's connectivity perhaps with the way Miss Leary was found and the way Miss Romano is found. First off, Miss Romano was reported missing back on August 18th of 2024. Well, that's incredibly close to the same date with Miss Leary. She's September 29th of 2004. And again, Miss Romano is not found until March 26th of 2025. And here's the other commonality between Leary and Romano. They're both found in wooded areas. Okay. So, if you're looking for little things to kind of pin together here, remember that connective thread that runs through, that would be significant, I think, because, and again, how were the bodies found? I always return back to this because I worked a case where a guy was always posing bodies, a series of cases. And I think I caught like 2 of them, but there were people from Jacksonville, Florida, all the way to Beaumont, Texas, that had caught cases that they believed were related, and this guy always posed the bodies. So that's one, I'm kind of prejudiced in my mind relative to that. I always want to know the position of the body. I always want to, were they seated? Were they sprawled out? And he also had an affinity for taking their underwear off, turning it inside out and putting it back on the body. So there's those little bitty nuanced things that you look for in all of these cases. And again, they haven't released the information to let us know that, what that commonality is that runs through. Is there anything here between these 2 cases that you can kind of hitch them together? Well, I think that's very important.
Their ages are close.
Age groupings as well.
Now, because you've got Denise is 59, Denise Leary is 59, Michelle Romano is 56.
Yeah, and bracketing of ages. If you've got somebody that is generally that's a sexual predator, for instance, they have an affinity for a type. Okay. And that does hold true with most serial perpetrators. There is a group of people, I think probably the first time that was ever, I get so sick and tired of saying this guy's name, but I can't, he's always the benchmark for everything in serial killing. And that's Bundy. There's that famous, have you ever seen that famous collage of images of all of the victims together, and they've all got brown or black long hair, and he had a type. Going back to the 44 caliber killer with Son of Sam, remember, women up there in that area, in the New York area, were actually changing their hairstyles because of him, because they said he was targeting a certain type. And so that's a big thing, with them. What are they looking for? And type can be appearance. It can be age. Okay. You think of Vine City in Atlanta. Well, you're looking at victims in their 70s and their 80s. And I know what look, Dave and I look at each other over the camera, and you're shaking his head, and you're right. But, you think, what's the driver behind this? What's the psychopathology that goes into the individual that's choosing to do this to these people? But again, we still don't know with these 3 women that we've mentioned to date that are identified. We don't know what their cause and manner of death is. And 2 of them they're so advanced in decomposition that I don't know. And, it wouldn't surprise me, to tell the truth, that that we're going to have this come out, and they're going to say something like, if they rule it as a homicide, it'll be non-specific homicidal violence. We hear that term all the time. And I understand why they do it, because it's hard to explain away why the bodies were there, why they were in the condition that they were there. Would they have just gone there and died of natural causes if you don't see any instrumentality that's associated with them having taken their own life, like an old rusted pistol or maybe an open vial of drugs, an empty vial of drugs? Then you have to assume that it's something other than taking your own life or homicide. I don't know. In the cases of Denise Leary and Paige Fannin and, of course, Michelle Romano, their loved ones, they know where they are. They know that they are, in fact, deceased. They've been positively identified. But with all the cases in total in question, there's still 3 that remain unidentified to this moment in time when I'm recording this. One found on March 19th in Connecticut, one found April 9th in Killingly, and another found actually on April the 10th in Framingham. They're unidentified to this point. And also to this point, we don't know who they are or what became of them. One interesting little aside is that the remains that were found in Groton, Connecticut, on March the 19th, this individual, who is female, actually presented with a condition, listen to this, that's called Turner syndrome. And Turner syndrome is a genetic condition where the individual will present, and it's something that's diagnosed early on in life. Generally, the individuals are short in stature. They have delayed puberty. They have heart defects. Generally, they're infertile. And also, there is a pigmentation issue with their skin. This is very, very definitive as far as this person is concerned. I would urge anybody within the sound of my voice that if you know someone or you have a loved one that might be missing, that has been diagnosed with Turner syndrome, and again, this only occurs in females, you probably ought to reach out to the authorities in Groton, Connecticut, because this might be somebody that they're looking for. But we're going to keep our eye on all of these cases and see where the road leads. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.